Welcome to Throne Theories, where we dive deep into the stories of Westeros and explore the what-ifs that could have changed everything. If you enjoy alternate timelines, character deep dives, or unraveling the forgotten corners of the Game of Thrones universe, you're in the right place. If you like what you hear, leave a like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a new theory. And, most importantly, drop your own ideas in the comments. What would you change? What story should we twist next? Now, let's dive into today's theory. What if honour didn't die in King's Landing? Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, stood in the dungeons of the Red Keep, surrounded by darkness and the scent of death. In the canon timeline, this is where his story ends, betrayed by Littlefinger, manipulated by Varys, and ultimately executed on the steps of Baelor's Sept in a moment that shocked Westeros and reshaped history. But what if the Spider chose differently? Varys was always a man of hidden motives, a weaver of webs, a servant, at least in his own mind, of the realm. In this alternate history, Varys weighs the future and sees a grim picture. A mad boy king, a vengeful queen, and a realm teetering on the edge of war. He knows Ned Stark is not a player of the game, but he is a stabilizing force. And more importantly, he is a father. So Varys makes a different choice. He arranges Ned's escape, not out of sentimentality, but calculation. The plan is simple but risky. A bribe to a pair of gold cloaks, a tunnel beneath the Red Keep, and a contact on the outside, a smuggler loyal to House Stark. Ned is skeptical, but his love for his daughters outweighs his pride. Meanwhile, Arya Stark has already vanished into the bowels of King's Landing. In the chaos of Ned's arrest, she slips away under Syrio Forel's protection. In this version of events, Syrio does not die, or at least, Arya believes he survives. They part ways at the Mudgate. Arya hides, steals, survives, and eventually, through whispered words passed from Varys's little birds, she is reunited with her father. The moment is brief. There's no time for tears, only escape. Sansa is still in the lion's den. Trapped within the Red Keep, she is under Cersei's control, naive, desperate, and still dreaming of love and knighthood. But as Joffrey reveals his cruelty and Cersei her manipulation, Sansa begins to question everything. In this alternate timeline, she doesn't blindly trust the Queen. She listens to her handmaidens. She hears the whispers about her father. And when the time comes, she chooses to flee. With the help of Varys, or perhaps even Sandor Clegane, who's seen the madness in Joffrey's eyes, Sansa escapes the Red Keep in the dead of night. Dressed as a servant, eyes downcast, heart racing, the Stark trio, Ned, Arya, and Sansa, flee King's Landing disguised as merchants, carried away on a modest riverboat headed down the Blackwater Rush. There's no grand send-off, no valiant last stand, just cold fear and quiet footsteps in the dark. Ned is wounded emotionally and physically. He feels the weight of failure, of broken oaths and shattered honour, but he is alive. And so are his daughters. They travel by night, avoiding patrols, avoiding the King's Road. In the daytime, they hide in old ruins or humble cottages. Sansa learns to sew her own cloak. Arya kills a rabbit for the first time. And Ned, he watches them, wondering what kind of world he's brought them into. When the court awakens to Ned Stark's disappearance, panic erupts. Cersei is furious. Joffrey demands heads. Littlefinger plays dumb. The gold cloaks are purged, half of them executed for treason. Varys, ever the survivor, shifts blame to others and vanishes from court for days. The Lannisters spin the story. Ned Stark fled justice, took his daughters, and declared rebellion. The rumours spread like wildfire. At Winterfell, Maester Luwin reads the Raven Scroll with shaking hands. Robb Stark learns his father lives, but also that war is now inevitable. The message is simple, alive. Escaping, prepare the north. Robb does not march immediately. He gathers bannermen quietly. He sends ravens to trusted houses, Umber, Mormont, Glover. He does not yet declare war, not until his father returns. And when word spreads that Ned Stark escaped the capital with both daughters, the North roars with fury, not over an execution, but over a manhunt. A northern lord pursued like a criminal, his daughters marked as fugitives. That fury, it burns hot. The Stark party journeys north through the Riverlands, now increasingly volatile. Lord Tywin has already begun his brutal campaign in the region, punishing towns for loyalty to the Tullys. In this chaos, Ned cannot go to Riverrun, not yet. Instead, they travel through abandoned roads and half-burned villages. In one village, they hide in a barn as Lannister men pass by. In another, they are nearly caught by Gregor Clegane's raiders, but Arya, ever fearless, distracts the soldiers long enough for Ned and Sansa to escape. Later, they are briefly sheltered by a small folk family who do not recognize them but offer food and safety without asking questions. These moments are small, but they are precious. They shape the girls, harden them. Weeks later, bruised and exhausted, the Starks return home. Winterfell has never looked colder, but the North welcomes them with open arms. When Ned rides through the gates, flanked by his daughters, it is as if a ghost has returned. Robb runs to them. The Maester weeps. Septa Mordane clasps Sansa's hands with quiet reverence, but the joy is short-lived. Ned knows this reprieve is temporary. War is coming. He did not bring peace. He brought warning. Ned Stark writes one final letter before the banners are called. He declares Joffrey Baratheon a false king. He affirms that Robert's true heir is Stannis Baratheon. He does not call for war, but he warns that the Lannisters seek to silence the truth, and that the North will not stand idly by. This letter spreads faster than wildfire. In the Reach, it is dismissed. In the Vale, it is debated. In Dragonstone, Stannis clenches it in his fist and calls his banners. The game has changed. As Act 1 ends, we cut to a cold wind blowing across the wall. At Castle Black, Jon Snow stares into the dark woods beyond. The air is colder than usual. The shadows are moving. A ranger has not returned. And beyond the trees, far in the icy distance, the White Walkers are already marching. Act 2. Winterfell had always been cold, but now it felt still, like the pause between lightning and thunder. The Stark children were no longer children. Arya had learned to run and fight. Sansa had learned to lie. And Robb, now watching his father recover from wounds both seen and unseen, began to grasp what it meant to carry a family's name on your shoulders. Ned Stark did not waste time with mourning. His survival meant opportunity and also danger. Word of his return spread quickly, carried by maesters, merchants, and spies. House Stark was not broken. It had returned. That truth changed everything. Robb gathered the Northern Lords, Great John Umber, Maeg Mormont, Roose Bolton, and more. The mood was tense. Some urged immediate retaliation. Others, like Roose, spoke of caution, calculation. But Ned held the room. His presence reminded them of old oaths and older fears. He spoke plainly. War was coming, but not for revenge. The North would not fight for pride. It would fight to protect its own and to stand against a false crown. In this timeline, Robb Stark is not crowned king in the North, not yet. Ned remains the Lord of Winterfell, the Warden of the North, and the undisputed head of his house. Robb becomes his sword, his commander, and his shield. That difference alters the course of the war profoundly. There is no need for southern alliances just yet, no rushed Frey betrothal, no attempts at marrying for leverage. There is only planning, and the planning is smart. They do not march south immediately. Instead, they entrench. They study supply lines. They send riders to the Riverlands not for vengeance, but for intelligence. Ned writes to Hoster Tully, his old friend and ally. He writes to Howland Reed, the only man alive who knows Jon Snow's true parentage. Every word is measured, every move deliberate. Meanwhile, word reaches Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon reads Ned's letter and finds something rare, an ally he respects. Ned's name carries weight, more than Renly, more than any whisper from the capital. Stannis sends a raven in reply. It is not warm, but it is honest. He names Ned as a man of truth. And for now, that is enough. The Lannisters respond as expected, with fury. Tywin marches through the Riverlands with fire and steel, burning villages and testing the Tullys. Jaime remains at the head of a vanguard, taunting Riverrun with sieges and skirmishes. But Riverrun does not stand alone. Edmure Tully, now forewarned and reinforced, holds firm. He knows his niece and great-nieces live. That knowledge steels his spine. Back in the north, Sansa and Arya begin to grow in unexpected ways. Sansa, now removed from the poisonous court of Cersei, sees the politics of the north in a new light. She watches her father negotiate with lords. She hears her mother speak of alliances. She begins to ask questions, not about dresses, but about legacy. Arya, meanwhile, trains quietly with Robb's soldiers, her needle always close. The fear that once drove her now sharpens her. She has seen too much to go back to being just a lady. Jon Snow hears whispers through ravens. Word of his father's survival reaches the wall. He reads it in silence, fists clenched, unsure what it means for him. Ned had said he would tell him the truth. Someday. Now, that day might come. Ned writes to Jon but says little. Only, "Sigh, I'm proud of you. We will speak again." That letter means more than Jon can say. The Vale remains silent. Lysa Arryn refuses to act, hiding behind her gates and her fears. Littlefinger stirs the pot, whispering to her about revenge, about danger, about shadows in the east. But for now, she stays out of it. And far across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen receives whispers of chaos in Westeros, of a north that has not broken, of a family that should have died, now alive and defiant. She feeds her dragons and watches the map. She is not ready to invade, but the idea no longer seems so distant. The north prepares, the Riverlands resist, the capital festers. Westeros is not yet at war, but the pieces are moving, and for the first time in years, the Starks are moving together. Far beyond the wall, shadows begin to shift. Cold winds sweep through the haunted forest. Rangers vanish, and in the stillness of the north, something old begins to wake. Act 3. The Riverlands burned. Tywin Lannister's campaign was ruthless. Villages were razed, men were hanged as rebels, women taken, children left to starve. But unlike in the canon timeline, there was no impetuous northern king marching south in a rush for vengeance. There was no Robb Stark crowned in haste by fiery lords, eager to follow a boy into battle. There was only strategy. Ned Stark had no desire to become a conqueror, but he was a soldier, and he had learned the hard way what it meant to underestimate his enemies. This time, he was ready. Rather than send the entire northern force south, Ned deployed a series of mobile warbands led by trusted commanders, Robb, Great John Umber, and Galbart Glover. Their purpose was not conquest, but disruption. They avoided large-scale battles. Instead, They struck supply lines, harassed camps, and vanished into the trees. They fought like wolves, quick, vicious, and hard to catch. Meanwhile, Robb continued to grow, not as a king, but as a general. With his father as strategist and mentor, he learned patience. He learned when to hold back, when to feint, when to let the enemy think they were winning. The Riverlands responded in kind. Edmure Tully, given warning and support, held Riverrun with renewed strength. Jaime Lannister attempted a siege, but with scouts constantly sabotaging his lines, the attack stalled. He grew frustrated, reckless. Eventually he made a critical mistake, leading a charge without adequate support, only to be ambushed by a joint Stark-Tully force. Jaime Lannister was captured. But this time it wasn't Robb who held him, it was Ned. And Ned did not gloat. He did not threaten. He looked into the eyes of the Kingslayer and saw only tragedy and strategy. Jaime was a key to a larger game. Back in King's Landing, Cersei exploded with fury. Her brother, her shield, her confidant, now in Stark custody. She blamed Tyrion. She blamed Varys. She blamed everyone. Joffrey, still king, still mad, ordered retaliation. But without the immediate chaos caused by Ned's death, the capital had not yet fully collapsed into madness. The High Council resisted rash action. Tyrion, still hand, tried to regain control. Renly Baratheon, meanwhile, declared himself king. In the Reach, he was beloved. His charm, his youth, and the Tyrell alliance made him a threat. But Stannis, now allied with the truth of Ned Stark's words, prepared to march as well. He had Melisandre by his side, and fire in his blood. Ned did not support either Baratheon openly, but privately he communicated with Stannis. He shared intelligence, coordinated movements, warned of Lannister traps, and in doing so, helped tilt the war in Stannis' favour. Still, Renly was not to be dismissed. With Highgarden behind him, he amassed the largest army in Westeros. But politics move faster than swords. And when Renly met his brother at Storm's End, the shadow fell just the same. Melisandre's dark magic did not care for alternate timelines. Renly died in his tent, a whisper of smoke at his throat. Stannis marched. Now 3 armies moved toward King's Landing, Stannis from the south, the Lannisters from the west, and the Northerners from the Riverlands. But this time there was no red wedding looming, no fractured alliances hastily formed, no overconfident young wolf marching to his doom. In fact, something strange began to happen. Peace was whispered. Some riverlords began to speak of mediation. The Vale, still quiet, sent emissaries. The Iron Bank, sensing instability, reached out to Stannis and even Ned, hedging bets. Ned considered it, but not yet. Too many enemies were still on the board. Too much blood had already been spilled. Back in the north, things remained stable. Sansa became more involved in council meetings, helping her mother manage provisions, learning the subtlety of rule. Arya, increasingly uncontainable, convinced Ned to let her travel briefly with a scouting party. She returned weeks later with a broken lip, a dead squirrel, and a silent, proud smile. And then there was Jon. At the Wall, Jon Snow's role began to shift. With Ned alive, his confidence grew. His sense of identity strengthened. And when word reached Castle Black that Benjen Stark had not returned, Jon begged to go north of the Wall to find him. He was granted permission, barely. The Rangers disappeared into the snow. Only a few returned. What they spoke of chilled the bones of even the bravest men. Blue eyes, dead men walking, a darkness in the forest. The White Walkers were no longer myth. They were coming. News travelled slowly to the south, and even more slowly to those who would believe it. But to Ned Stark, the words struck deep. He remembered the tales his brother Benjen used to tell. He remembered the look in Jon's eyes when he asked about the wall, and he remembered the long winters of his youth when the cold seemed to whisper warnings through the stones. War still raged across the south, but in the north, Ned began to prepare for a different kind of war, the final kind. Act 4. King's Landing simmered like a pot left too long on the fire. The capital was still intact, its walls unbroken, its throne still golden. But inside the Red Keep, cracks had formed, some visible, most invisible. Cersei Lannister ruled through Joffrey, and Joffrey ruled through cruelty. Every day his orders grew more erratic. Executions, whippings, burnings, and though his bannermen still swore loyalty, their eyes wandered toward Riverrun, toward Storm's End, toward Dragonstone, and now toward Winterfell. The power of House Lannister had once felt inevitable. Now it felt temporary, fragile. Stannis Baratheon was marching from the south, the Northerners from the Riverlands, and word of Renly's sudden, inexplicable death began to cast suspicion and fear across the Reach. The Tyrells had backed the wrong king, and they were angry. But the Tyrells were not foolish. Lady Olenna, sharp as ever, knew when to change direction. She wrote to King's Landing with honeyed words and subtle offers. Margaery Tyrell, now a widow, arrived in the city with banners flying high and a quiet determination to secure a new crown, one she would wear beside Joffrey. Tyrion Lannister, still acting hand, saw the game unfold in real time. He tried to hold the city together with wit and wine and wildfire. He built alliances. He prepared defences. And in his quieter moments, he wondered aloud whether the city was even worth saving. Because fire was coming. Stannis arrived at Blackwater Bay with fewer men than he'd hoped. The storm gods had not been kind. But he came all the same, driven by righteousness and prophecy and the Red Woman at his side. This time, though, he did not come alone. He had allies in the shadows, Northerners who had filtered down, skirting the main front, informants from the Riverlands, and whispers of support from within the capital itself. The Battle of Blackwater still happened. The wildfire still burned the bay green. But Stannis had learned from the first timeline. He avoided the harbour traps. He spread his forces along the shore, hammering the city's defences from the east and the south. And the Tyrells? They waited. They watched to see who would win. Inside the city, chaos reigned. Joffrey panicked, retreating to the Red Keep. Cersei drank. Sansa was locked away in Maegor's holdfast, listening to the sounds of war growing louder outside her window. Tyrion led the defence personally, scarred and determined. But it wasn't enough. Stannis' forces breached the gate. His knights stormed the streets. The city bled. And then, at the very last hour, the banners of Highgarden appeared, Loras Tyrell at their head. But this time, he did not come to save Joffrey. He came to remove him. It was not a coup. Not exactly. It was a replacement. Joffrey was declared unfit. Madness, they said. Bloodlust. Margaery's new husband would be Tommen, a softer boy, easier to shape. Cersei was confined. Joffrey was taken, and never seen again. The throne did not fall. It was reshaped. Tommen Baratheon, crowned by both the Reach and the remnants of the capital, was declared king. But behind him stood Tywin Lannister. And behind Tywin, Lady Olenna and the High Septon. Stannis, furious at being denied the throne again, retreated to Dragonstone. He had taken the city, but not the crown. And now the capital belonged to neither side fully. In the north, Ned Stark watched the reports with cold calculation. The war had not ended. It had only changed form. There was no victory in the capital, only compromise. But further east, across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen began to understand something crucial. Westeros was weak. She had dragons. She had followers. She had the loyalty of freedmen, the respect of mercenaries, and the ambition of someone who had nothing to lose. She had conquered Slavers Bay in record time. And now, as ravens arrived from Westeros, whispering of divided kings and broken thrones, she saw her moment approaching. She would not sail yet, but she would prepare. And as the dragons grew, so too did her desire. Back in Westeros, the Iron Islands made their move. Balon Greyjoy, ever opportunistic, launched raids along the western coast. But Theon, who had once dreamed of glory, now hesitated. In this timeline, he had never been fully alienated from Robb Stark. He still remembered the man who treated him as a brother. He wrote to Winterfell. He begged for peace. And though many in the north wanted his head, Ned Stark did not. The letter was short. "Come home, or die with your father." Theon chose to return. His arrival changed little on the surface, but in the shadows it mattered. A thread pulled back into the fold before it could unravel the whole tapestry. The war was not over, but the pieces had shifted. The south no longer burned from a single fire. It smouldered in many places at once, some with ambition, some with desperation, and some with secrets long buried. And far to the north, the cold wind blew stronger than ever. Act 5. The snow came early that year. It fell softly in Winterfell, dusting the rooftops like powdered sugar, but it was no sign of peace, only warning, a sign of what stirred beyond the wall. Ned Stark stood in the godswood beneath the heart tree, snow settling in his hair, and he thought of his brother Benjen, of Jon, of all the stories passed off as legend. They were real now, and they were coming. In the far north, the Night's Watch had suffered grave losses. More rangers vanished every week. What came back, if anything came back at all, was silent and broken. Jon Snow had returned to Castle Black with eyes colder than before. He spoke of things that did not bleed, of men whose eyes glowed blue, of a force that moved like a storm across the forest, unstoppable and patient. Jean Mormont believed him, and so did Samwell Tarly, who had seen one of them die and return. The wall had never felt so thin. Jon was promoted faster than in the canon timeline. The loss of senior officers and his early exposure to the truth elevated him swiftly. But the command weighed heavy. He knew what was coming. And for the first time he knew that his father, the man he once believed just a lord, might be the only one who would listen. So he wrote. The Raven carried a message south, not of politics, not of banners, but of death. Ned read it by candlelight, in the same room where he once sat with young Robb and Bran and spoke of knights and monsters. Now the monsters were real, and the time for knights was past. He called a council. The lords of the north, Umber, Mormont, Karstark, Reed, were summoned to Winterfell. Robb stood beside his father, Sansa beside her mother. Arya lingered in the corner, half listening, half glaring. They spoke of the White Walkers, of old tales and new truths. Most did not believe at first, but Ned, ever the realist, laid the evidence bare. A severed hand, a body that did not rot, a raven from the wall describing the dead marching in the snow, and more than that, Jon's words. That convinced them. The North would not wait for the South. It never had. Preparations began at once. Fortifications, supply stockpiles, dragon glass weapons, ordered in secret from the blacksmiths of the Vale. Ravens sent to trusted allies, urging them to prepare not for a battle, but for the end. In the south, they did not listen. Tommen Baratheon ruled now, soft and sweet and surrounded by wolves in rose petals. Lady Olenna kept the Reach calm. Tywin worked to stabilize the realm. Cersei simmered in her chambers, powerless but dangerous. And Stannis sat in Dragonstone, burning letters and refusing to yield. To them, the war was over, the throne secured. But the Long Night did not care for thrones. Daenerys Targaryen was finally ready. Her dragons grown, her fleet assembled. She had left Meereen in peace, barely, and now sailed west with the Unsullied, the Dothraki, and 3 monsters in the sky. She had learned hard lessons. She would not be merciful. She reached Westeros not in triumph, but in warning. At Dragonstone she was met not by fire, but by a raven. A message from the north, a plea to speak, to listen, to see the threat that would make all this conquest meaningless. And, to her surprise, she listened. It was Tyrion who convinced her. In this timeline, he had never been exiled. He had fled King's Landing after the fall of Joffrey. Fearing Cersei's wrath, he had sailed east, found Daenerys, and now he told her the truth. Westeros was divided, yes, but the war was not for the throne. It was for the dawn. She agreed to meet with Ned Stark. In the fields outside Winterfell, the dragon descended. Arya stood still. Sansa flinched. Robb stared. And Ned watched with the eyes of a man who had seen enough death to know that even a dragon was not the enemy. Daenerys dismounted. They did not bow to one another. They did not threaten. They spoke. She asked for trust. He asked for help. And for the first time since Aegon's Landing, the North and the Targaryens stood on the same ground, side by side, not in blood, but in necessity. Jon Snow returned from the Wall days later. He met Daenerys in the hall his father once ruled. Neither knew yet what bound them, but both felt it, some current beneath the skin. She watched him with curiosity. He watched her with caution. But all such thoughts were shattered when the first horn sounded from the Wall. Not once, not twice, 3 times. The White Walkers had come. The Wall, once thought unbreakable, cracked under the weight of ancient magic and cold fire. The Night King, silent and calm, led his army through the breach. The dead poured forth, not screaming, not shouting, only marching, tireless, endless. And above them flew a dragon of ice, its eyes burning blue. Winter had arrived. Act 6. The Long Night. The Wall had fallen. The dead flooded south like a tide of ice and silence, devouring the lands they touched. Villages vanished overnight. Castles burned. The living ran, some to Winterfell, others into the mountains, some into graves they never chose. At Winterfell there were no more sides, no crowns, no talk of kings, only survival. Ned Stark stood atop the battlements beside Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow. Robb commanded the ground forces, flanked by northern lords and Riverland riders. The dragons circled overhead, but even their fire felt uncertain now. What came for them was not just an army, but a memory of death before time, of darkness older than fire. The dead arrived at dawn. The Battle of Winterfell was chaos. No tactics, no formations, just cold, teeth, and steel. The dragons burned lines in the snow, but every corpse that fell rose again. Whites climbed the walls like insects. Swords shattered, arrows froze, lives ended. Dozens, hundreds. Arya moved through shadow, a blur of blades and instinct. Sansa directed civilians to the crypts, her face hard but her hands shaking. Samwell Tarly fought like a man with nothing left to fear. And Theon Greyjoy died defending Bran beneath the weirwood tree, his redemption sealed in the snow. Jon reached the Night King, again, but this time it was not enough. The Night King overpowered him. Daenerys tried to save him, but her dragon was pulled from the sky, impaled by spears of ice. Viserion died screaming. It was Bran who made the difference. He had changed since the fall of the Wall. The powers that had once made him a passive observer now made him something else. a vessel of the past, present, and a sliver of what must come. When the Night King approached, Bran stood. He did not run. He did not fight. He looked, and in that moment, the Night King hesitated. Arya was waiting behind him, but this time she didn't strike alone. She and Jon came together, steel in hand, fire at their backs. The Night King turned. The moment froze, and Arya buried the blade in his throat. Not the dagger from Littlefinger, a new one, forged of dragon glass, made in the forges of White Harbour by a smith Jon had pulled from obscurity. A weapon not of prophecy but preparation. The Night King shattered. The army collapsed. But it was no victory. Thousands lay dead. The godswood soaked red. One dragon gone. The north half burned. No songs would be sung of that day. There was no glory in survival. When it was over, the council met in the great hall of Winterfell. Daenerys, her face hardened by loss. Jon, quiet. Sansa, calculating. Ned, older than he'd ever seemed. There was no Iron Throne anymore. King's Landing had burned, not by wildfire, not by war, but by fear. Riots had torn it apart in the chaos of the invasion. Tywin Lannister was dead. Cersei vanished. The realm had no centre. So the question returned, what now? Not peace, not yet, but something like order. The North remained independent. Sansa saw to that. Robb was named Lord Paramount of the Riverlands and Warden of the North. Arya left, not for adventure, but because she'd become someone who couldn't stay. Jon refused any crown. He returned to the Wall, not to serve, but to rebuild it, to guard it. The free folk followed him, and so did the last dragon. The Wall would rise again, not to divide Westeros, but to remind it. Daenerys did not rule. She left Dragonstone, sailing east once more. She had freed cities before. Perhaps that was her path. Perhaps not. She never said. She left quietly. No farewell. And Ned Stark? He stayed. Winterfell endured. The scars of the war were deep, but his family lived. His people lived. His honour, once a death sentence, had bought them time. And in the quiet nights beneath the weirwood tree, he wondered what Westeros would become. Not better, but different. The game had ended, not with a winner, but with the board broken. That wraps up this journey through Westeros. If you enjoyed this theory, make sure to like the video, subscribe to Throne Theories, and share it with fellow fans of the realm. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did this timeline make sense? Would the characters have made different choices? And what scenario should we explore next? Drop your ideas in the comments. Your theory might be the next video. Until then, remember, in the Game of Thrones, the theories are endless.